In this video, I'll demonstrate how to record simple macros, and then we'll put buttons on our worksheet and assign those macros to the buttons, and it'll help us automate some tasks. Now basically a macro, or especially a recorded macro, is simply a way to automate tasks that we do over and over again. It's a program that gets written by Excel. We'll save that program and then we'll assign it to a button. In order to do these tasks, we need the developer ribbon visible, and when you first install Excel, it's not there. So to turn it on, we have to go to File Options, and under Customize Ribbon, there's a checkbox for developer. Mine, of course, is already on, so it shows as checked. I'll hit OK, and now the ribbon is here visible. Over here on the left is where we're going to record the button for turning on to record our macro. Before we do that, 2 buttons down is macro security. In here are 4 settings for establishing macro security, in that macros can be malicious and cause damage, and so Excel is set up to, in my case, disable all macros with notification. So if I open a workbook that has a macro, I'm going to get a little pop-up that says, this has macros. Do you want to enable them? And I'll hit enable, and then I'm good to go. You can also just disable all macros. It won't even tell you that there's a macro in the workbook. Or you could disable all but digitally signed macros, which indicate that it's safe. Or you could enable all macros, but that's the most dangerous because no matter what the macro is doing, Excel is allowing it to run. The most common setting is this third one, disable all macros with notification. So then it's giving you the choice to enable it or not. So let's hit OK. The macro we're going to start out with is assuming that with this spreadsheet, I'm always wanting to sort this by location and then by person. But other times I want to sort this data by person and by annual salary. And so rather than constantly having to run to the data sort ribbon, I'm going to create a couple buttons such that I just have to hit the buttons and I can achieve either of those 2 sorts. So I'm going to record a macro that has me doing those actions. You need to plan ahead because once I hit this record button, it literally records every step that I take. And so if I make a couple mistakes, it's recording my mistakes. So you kind of want to have practiced this so that when you hit record, you can just easily step through the steps you want to take and not have any extra steps in your macro. So I'm going to hit the record button, and it's going to ask you, well, what do you want to call it? And I'll just say sort by location. You cannot have spaces in the name of your macro. You can assign shortcut keys so that rather than hitting a button, you can actually, let's just say I will do Control T. So when I hit Control T on my keyboard, it will run this sort by location. And now that I think about it, maybe Control S or Control L would make more sense in this case. We're going to store the macro in this workbook, and if I want, I can define a description for it, but I'm just going to hit OK. At this point, it's recording, and up here it says stop recording. So every step I take will be visible. So when I click on these cells, that's being recorded, and if you're quick enough, we can actually watch that happen when we run the macro. So in this case, we're going to go to the data ribbon. That's being recorded. I'm going to hit the sort button, and I want to sort by location, add a level, and then within a location, we'll sort by last name. I'll go ahead and leave it all as A to Z. I'll hit OK. It did the sort, and now I'm good. I'm going to stop recording. So there's a stop button in the very bottom left, or I can go to the developer ribbon and hit stop recording right there. So we have our macro. Just to switch up our data, I'm going to record or sort over here on A to Z. And now remember I assigned a shortcut key, Control L, I think is how I finally left off. So if I hit Control L, it sorts the data by location, by last name. Now let's create a second macro where we sort by last name by salary. So again, developer, I will hit record macro. It's going to ask for a name, so I'll go sort by last name. I will call that one Control N. This workbook, no description. I'll hit OK. And so now it's recording, so I'll run to data sort expand the selection. Yes, I didn't realize I had 3 cells there. Now this time we're going to go by last name, and our second one will be by salary, annual salary. And we'll go largest to smallest and hit OK. So now we're sorted by name and by salary. And now that I think about it, that's actually kind of a stupid sort, because most of the names are going to be unique, and the second level of our sort's really accomplishing nothing. But be that as it may, we'll live with it. Run to the developer ribbon, and we're going to hit stop recording. So now let's assign these 2 macros to a button. On the developer ribbon, there's an insert, and there's 2 types of buttons, form controls, which are the ones we want. And there's different kind of controls. This right here is a button, so I'll click on that. My cursor turns to a plus. I can drag it across to wherever I want. And then it says, all right, what button do you want to assign to that? And I'll assign sort by last name on that one and hit OK. Now, of course, I'm going to want to say that on there, so I'm just selecting in the button. And now I can say sort by last name. You can size the button with these fill handles. When you're done, you can click out, and now the button's ready to be used. I'll create a second button, and again I can drag anywhere and put it, and I will assign sort by location on this one, and then I can say sort by location. And again I'll click out, or maybe before I do I will kind of size it to have it be similar to that one. Then I'll click out. If you ever want to edit your button, you have to right click on it to select it, because if you just try to left click, you're going to run your macro. So I'll click out to unselect my button. Now let's go ahead and sort by location. I did, and now I can sort by last name. If you ever want to see the code that the macro generated when we recorded it, there's a Visual Basic button right here. I can click on that, and it opens up a whole new window, and inside these modules are your different macros. I will scroll down. I had a couple extra in this workbook before I started, but here's our sort by location, and you can kind of read them. They're not that hard to read, but here was range K10. I've selected it. Here I'm starting to clear the sort fields, and now I'm adding a key range, F8 to 107, sort on values. Anyway, you get the idea. And so sometimes you can edit these macros if you can read them and tell what's going on. They're stored with the workbook, so when I close this window, if I were to save this workbook, the macro gets stored with the workbook. Now, as long as I'm talking about that, let's save this workbook. When I go File, Save As, and I'll just browse to a place. If it's an XLSX, watch what happens when I try to save it. It's going to say, whoa, oh, that's not, I'll go ahead and hit the yes on that. This is the message I'm expecting, that this workbook contains macros, and if you save it as an XLSX, you're going to lose them. And so to continue saving as a macro-free workbook, click yes. And so I'm going to hit no, I don't want to. I want to save my macros. And so what I have to do is change the type from XLSX to XLSM. So that's a macro-enabled workbook. Anytime you've set up a macro in a workbook, you need to make sure you're saving it as an XLSM, which, by the way, is also important to know when you're opening a workbook. You can tell ahead of time that it has a macro because it has that M file extension. So now we're saving our macros with the workbook. That's an important step because you go through a lot of work recording your macros, and then when you go to save the workbook, if you don't make it an XLSM, you've just wiped out all the macros that you spent so much time creating. You can create a macro that basically automates any task that you're doing by clicking on things along the ribbon. But what you can't record is any kind of if logic, like if this condition is true, then I want to do that. You need to actually write programming. You can write code in VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. That makes your macros way more sophisticated. Recording is basically limited to what you can do by clicking on commands along the ribbon to automate certain tasks. So I'll do one more macro. Let's just say I want to filter this data based on the HMOF health plan. So I'm constantly filtering, and then we'll clear the filter. So again, I'll run to developer. We'll record this macro, no spaces. So that's what I'll call it. I won't give it a shortcut key this time. So now when I run to data, I'm going to turn on, whoops, am I recording? I forgot what I'm doing here. Yep. So run to data, I'll turn on my filters. I am going to choose just the HMO health plans. There's my filter. I'm done. So I can stop recording. I'll run over to the developer ribbon, stop recording. And now I'm going to record one more macro called clear filter. Same thing, and it's just going to be a one-step macro. It's simply going here and typing clear, and maybe I'll turn off the filter buttons at that point. So now I'll stop recording again. You can assign macros to buttons. I've demonstrated that. You can actually also assign macros when you go to insert. Right here are these shapes. So you can put in different shapes. So I'll put in the smiley face, and if I right click on it, I can actually assign a macro to that. And so I'll assign the filter to that one, and then I can assign another shape. Doesn't matter. So I'll choose this one, and I can right click assign macro and make that one my clear filter. So now I have a finger. I click and I'm filtered on HMOF. I can see my filter boxes, arrows next to each column, and then I can clear the filter and back to the way the data was before. So you get the idea. I can automate some very simple tasks and then assign them whether to buttons or shapes to potentially make your worksheet much easier to use, especially for a user who's not as familiar with Excel.